I've mentioned this before, and if you've kind of more recent in our church, you wouldn't have heard me say this because I don't speak about it all the time, but I have of late really become fascinated in our Judaic roots as Christians. Christians, or followers of Jesus, believers in the way of Jesus, we have to appreciate from where Jesus came into what Jesus was born and how is it applicable to us. And Jesus was a Jew. He was born into the people of Israel, the Jewish nation, and the Jewish nation have a very particular place in our Bibles, in the ways of God. And so I am fascinated by what that journey was. We are in a time now where a particular festival is about to be celebrated, a feast. The Feast of Tabernacles, and it's also known as Sukkot, okay? And there's a lot in there as to how it could be applicable to us. 1 Timothy 6, and I'm going to read from verse 6 to 10, and then also from verse 17. This is what it says. But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. Those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. It's a bit heavy, I appreciate. Verse 10. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. Let's jump to verse 17. This is Paul talking to Timothy, who really was a protege of him, somebody who he was mentoring, discipling, and entrusting to carry responsibility and leadership in the context of church. He says this to Timothy, verse 17. Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their trust or hope in wealth, which is so uncertain. Isn't that the truth? The wealth of the world, the circumstances of the world, if you haven't already seen, we live in pretty uncertain times. But, Timothy, encourage people to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. And it's that last little statement that I want to explore, open up, go on a journey on over the next few weeks, speaking of the God who provides. Put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. And I even like that statement, for our enjoyment. Sukkot, the festival of tabernacles, it is a celebration, but this is what it is primarily celebrating. The context was the journey of the people of God from being enslaved in Egypt to being liberated by God through Moses, then going on a journey through the wilderness to the promises of God. And you can see that as a beautiful picture for us even now. That we were oppressed or held captive to sin. Egypt from a metaphor perspective. We were liberated by Christ, not by Moses. And now we are on a journey to fulfill a promise that God has for us. But we are still on that journey, yes, justified, yes, rescued, yes, saved, but now on this journey to the ultimate fulfillment at the end of times we will arrive in that promise. But Sukkot is to celebrate the journey in the wilderness. And it was to celebrate this. It was to remind people of the temporary nature of life. That their time in the wilderness was temporary. It wasn't permanent. This life that we live in this time is temporary. It's not permanent. However, there is an eternity to come. And it's important for us to live from that perspective. The other thing that it was trying to highlight was that even while they were in the wilderness, God was present with them. The tabernacle, the physical structure that God had instructed them to create was God residing with his people. The term used often is that God tabernacled with his people. That his physical presence was with them even while they were in the wilderness. So circumstantially, everything wasn't perfect. They were liberated, they were on a journey to a promise, but that in-between time had some challenges. It was filled with uncertainty. It was filled with the harshness of the desert. And yet in the midst, God resides with people, with his people, whom we are that. But not only is it celebrating that God was present with his people, it is also to remember, to remind, to celebrate that God cares for his people. And it was most seen in his provision. That's where the care of God was seen or evidenced. That even though they found themselves circumstantially in a desert, in a harsh environment, in uncertainty, in a place that they were unaware of how to bring about certain aspects of their life that they needed to fulfill, God present with them, caring, evidenced in him providing. And that is the God that we serve. We serve a God who provides. I was woken up the other night at 1:30 and I couldn't get back to sleep. And what woke me up was anxiety. It's what woke me up. I was trying to figure out our house situation with repayments on bonds. I was trying to figure out how to set up stuff with Eskom, which it's not that straightforward for some reason. And I was thinking of like utility bills and all this kind of stuff. And I couldn't get back to sleep. My mind was just full of anxiety. And it got me thinking along the lines of, how does this fit in the context of my faith? How does this fit in the context of a God that I believe in, of biblical truths that I have learned, understood, have had to relearn and question? And I come back to this truth of God being provider. Oftentimes, society or the world will think one way, and God calls us to live another way. Ultimately, what is the end goal of a message or teaching series like this? Well, it's the end goal of what every end goal should be, and essentially it is love. So in this series, where I am going to be highlighting the provision of God, what I don't want to do is to bring into us a spirit of more stuff, but lead us to a spirit of more love. Love from God, love for God, and love for each other. I mentioned earlier that we want to become a church that is the essence of community. We also want to become a church that is deeply formed by Jesus. That He is the one who is forming how we see things, who we are growing into being. That it is His teaching, His guidance, His Spirit that is forming us and creating something of substance in us to navigate this journey that we are on. And let me leave you with these two passages. John 15, Jesus speaking. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit, fruitfulness. In Romans chapter 4, speaking of Abraham, which is also now speaking to us, therefore the promise comes by faith. Faith. The promise comes by faith. So that it may be by grace, God's wisdom, God's power, God's abundance, and may be guaranteed to all Abraham's offspring. And so as we journey now into the provision of God, the end goal is more love. But it is by His grace that we're going to bookend everything of what this journey is, and to believe for His provision, even while we might be in times of wilderness, in times of uncertainty, in times of the desert.